Okay, so now before we go into speciation, so we're going to look at this concept of the species, because without understanding the concept of the species, you won't be able to appreciate or to know why speciation takes place. So what's mean speciation? Speciation is a process of development of new species. So if you don't understand what's meant by the species, then definitely you won't be able to understand how a new species actually develop from the pre-existing species. Okay, so let's look at this. So what's meant by the word species? So in the word of species, so it's a Latin word for kinds or appearance. So yes, we actually grouped this organism, we group organism based on the kind. So for example, okay, this tiger, okay, the family of tigers, okay, this one is cat. So we won't put them together under the same species because they totally look different. Okay, so basically, but it's not so easy to say that, okay, based on appearance only, based on appearance only. So the biologists compare not only the morphology. Morphology means body form. We also compare in terms of the physiology. Physiology means how the body functions. The bone, the body functions, okay, particular organs, are they function the same or not? Okay, biochemistry, right, in terms of the enzyme, in terms of proteins, are they the same or not? Okay, and also the DNA sequences. Okay, based on the DNA, okay, our one's ATCG and CGAG, for example, and we compare with the monkey, how many different? So it's too huge, the variation, what we call this, the difference, so it may be categorized as two different species. But no matter what are the definitions here, the best definition is come by this zoology, Mayers. And Mayers is the one that come out with this, what we call the biological species. So it means that use biological way to determine whether they belongs to the same species or not. So based on his definitions, so his definition of species basically is a group of actually or potentially interbreeding nature population which are reproductively isolated from other such group. So what does this definition means? So if you do not show whether these two, let's say for example, in terms of morphology, you realize that both of them, they are very, very similar. So should we place them under the same species or not? Are they belong to the same species? You can't actually base on the morphology only. For example, if you look at, they are human. Can I see that? So different, right? So different. Correct or not? But do you place them as a different? Are we place in terms of the physical appearance? Are we going to place them? Or do we going to are we going to place them into different species or not? The answer is no. So based on what? Based on what we actually place them as the same species or not, we allow them to interbreed. If A organism and B organism, if we cross them, we ask them to interbreed, if they can produce fertile offspring. Okay, now what's mean fertile offspring? Means that the offspring can produce offspring. Okay, their own offspring, then A and B belongs to the same species. That is the idea of, okay, that is idea of the biological species. Are you clear? So if we allow them to interbreed, if they can produce the fertile offspring, means the offspring can continue to produce the offspring, then okay, we do know that both of them, they are same species. If I ask another two organisms, X and Y, they look alike, very similar, but when they reproduce, they cannot. Either they cannot interbreed, or they cannot produce fertile offspring. Up, I'm going here. Okay, they cannot produce fertile offspring. Then X and Y, they belongs to the different species. So why they cannot interbreed or why they cannot produce fertile offspring? Because they are reproductively isolated from other species. So X and Y cannot interbreed because they are reproductively isolated. So it means that they cannot reproduce. Between these two. Okay. So according to this concept, okay, a species of group of populations whose number have a potential to interbreed means that they can actually interbreed. in nature and produce viable fertile offspring, but do not produce viable fertile offspring with a member of other group. So it means that if they can produce, it belongs them as the same species. Are you clear? So in other words, the species in the group of reproductive nature population incapable to effectively mate or breed with other to produce the fertile offspring, then these two belongs to two different species. So it means that these two birds, if you ask them to interbreed, they cannot. Because why? They behaviorally isolated. They cannot recognize the song. If they cannot recognize the song, basically means that they won't be able to interbreed. For example, if you cannot recognize that particular person, okay, or particular organism as humans, you don't interbreed with him or her, right? For example, you won't go and that means I get tiger and then you interbreed with tiger. Why? Because behaviorally we know that this is the tiger. We are humans, different. So that is the idea of behavioral isolations. Okay, so means that the mating song, the mating ritual different. So the birds cannot recognize, the male cannot recognize the female as the same species, then they are reproductively isolated. Okay, so like humans in this case, okay, humans, even though we look different at different continent, different country, we look different, our characteristic different, but if we put male and female together, they will be able to reproduce and produce fertile offspring. Means that the offspring can interbreed and produce the offspring again. So in this case, even though we look so diverse, but we belongs to the same species, but different races, for example, okay, or ethnicity. Clear? So Mayer actually defines, okay, Mayer defines, okay, the species, a group of actually or potentially interbreeding natural population which are reproductively isolated from other such group. But if we want to use this as a guideline, okay, you want to use this as a guideline, then we do face some limitations. Okay, we do face some limitations. So what are the limitations? For example, if we get the bone, okay, the fossil of the dinosaur, how are we going to ask them to interpret? Because they're extinct already, right? Extinct already. So how we know? We can't. So based on morphology, we have no choice. Or the organism, they are same sex, male and male, they cannot interbreed. Then you say, oh, different species, cannot. Or there's no facility to breed them, or they require a certain facility. Okay, so because we don't have, we cannot breed them. Or some of these organisms under a particular facility, they refuse to breed. It can be. Or organisms like bacteria, they reproduce asexually. Okay, asexually. So again, we won't be able to actually classify them whether they are the same species or not, based on this, whether they can interbreed or not. Or the organism may be immature. Immature basically means that, like for example, larvae. Okay, the mosquito larvae. How we know whether they can reproduce or not? Because the immature of caterpillar, right? We won't be able to do this. So these are the added limitations of the concept of species if you follow Mayer. Okay, so now widely accepted, okay, widely accepted concept of species now is defined as a group of organism. We're still looking into this, whether they have a similar morphology or not, whether they have the physiologically similar biochemistry, behavioral features, and we add in with the Mayer definitions here, which can interbreed to produce fertile offspring and are reproductively isolated from the other species. So even though we do want to use the Mayer definitions, but in some contexts, we may only be able to use the morphology, physiology, biochemistry. To some extent, we use the behavioral. However, the structural detail of the DNA sequencer may help to assess how close the two organisms, right, to each other. So despite a problem described above, many biologists will agree that feature which really decides whether or not two species belong to the different species depends on the inability to interbreed successfully. Until now, we still follow this. Are you clear? As long as they cannot, or they are reproductively isolated from each other, then they belong to two different species. Okay. So in this case, how to actually make sure that they belong to the same species and continue to belong to the same species, then we have to depend on the gene flow. Okay, so gene flow is the one that hold the gene pool. Like what we do know that if there is a constant gene pool flow, a gene flow between two gene pool, then these two gene pool would reduce in terms of diversity. Therefore, speciations won't occur. So typically, gene flow occur between different populations of the species. The ongoing exchange of the allele to hold the populations together genetically. Okay, and the absence of the gene flow is important of the formations of the new species. Okay, so these are the idea. Gene flow is very, very important. If gene flow continue, that particular species will be a particular population will remain as the same species. Okay, so off here.